Hi, and welcome to another Ask Augustin. This is the second episode I'll do on intonation, and I'll go maybe a little more in depth about some ideas. And I first wanted to talk about intonation habits, how sometimes the things that we're used to hearing from ourselves or from others influence what we think is in tune or not. But it's not always totally objective. Just one example is that we've gotten very used to a certain type of third in during the Romantic and modern era, which is like this. It's a major third that's actually quite wide, has a little bit of tension in it, but it sounds bright, and it makes the major sound quite bright, and the minor third that's actually quite narrow makes it sound, very sad. And it's this kind of expressive intonation is incredibly useful in Romantic and music, in music that's very expressive and still tonal. It's something you don't want to exaggerate too much. Sometimes, among violinists especially, actually, that can sometimes be. It's an easy habit to form because you get used to playing leading tones sharp, and if you take it too far, this becomes like. It becomes a little bit too much, and it also starts clashing with the intonation of lower strings. Cellists usually don't have the habit of playing leading tones so sharp, and it has to do with the technique of their instrument, and that they're often the bass line, and if they played leading tones that sharp, the whole thing would be kind of wacky, so they have a different approach, and we always need to be aware of the bass line and make sure that we're not too sharp for that. Even in orchestras, often intonation has a tendency to go apart. Violinists sharpen sharper, the others stay where they are, so it becomes kind of problematic. It also has to do with the fact that we tune in fifths. This is what I meant when I said intonation is relative also, that there isn't, that even the physics of it don't actually quite work out. Because if you put a bunch of fifths on top of each other, and you kept going, eventually you'd be a half step off, because a fifth, the way that it rings truly in tune, is slightly wide. But this is how, as a string player, we should be playing fifths, because they sound in tune. But we always need to be aware that eventually our E string is going to be a little sharp, actually, compared to the open C string of the cellos and basses, because of this phenomenon. This is why the whole thing of the well-tempered piano and how to tune pianos became such a big issue, because now the way pianos are tuned is that actually all the fifths are made slightly smaller, and as a result, the high notes of the piano and the low notes of the piano can still be in tune with each other. So ironically, the piano is the one instrument where fourths and fifths are not perfectly in tune, whereas generally for a string player, fourths and fifths are the intervals that we can always be very certain about. This is something to keep in mind, since we play a high instrument, always listen to the bass and play in tune with the bass. I mentioned that sometimes there's a tradition of tuning sharp among violinists, and it's a helpful tip when you're playing with orchestra not to tune to the A as it's given by the wind, but to tune slightly above that. However, this is dangerous because you don't want to be too sharp, and you can easily end up playing too sharp for the ensemble, and that can also be unpleasant. What I like to do when I play with orchestra is I actually wait for all of the strings to tune together, and generally that will be a little sharper than the A that the oboe gave, and it will be more like how the orchestra will later play, and I take that A and make sure that I'm in tune with the general sound of the strings. A lot of times the winds also will come up as the hall heats up, as when it gets hotter, and an orchestra will usually have found a way to play in tune together. So this might be a little bit different with each group, but this is when listening very closely to how the orchestra plays and adjusting to that, where that comes in. I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you next time.